I'm about to show you some things to try if your Xbox button on your controller is giving you one of these issues. These problems are usually caused by debris getting down into the button or by damage to the padding underneath it. There's no easy way to diagnose the cause, so this video will take a kitchen sink approach. I'm going to take you through a list of solutions to try, starting with simple ones and then leading on up to more difficult ones that involve going deep inside the controller. So start with method 1 and work your way through the list until your issue is resolved. The first 4 solutions will work on pretty much any modern Xbox controller, but the ones after that involve taking things apart. And that's where my instructions won't work well if you have an Elite controller, since those are quite different on the inside. The first thing to try is to scrape the gap between the button and the surrounding plastic to get rid of any residue that has accumulated there. It's a tight space, so whatever you stick in there will need to be super small, like a needle. If you're using a needle, make sure you watch what you're doing, because the top of the button is susceptible to scratches. You can also stick the corner of a paper product into the gap, something about as thick as a business card. Here I have one of those advertisements they hang on the doorknob, and the corners of it work well. When you stick it in there, don't slide it around, poke it up and down. If you slide it around, some of the paper is going to come off and get lodged in there. If scraping didn't work, try blowing. Take a straw and blow along the gap. If you have no straw, use canned air or even your own mouth. Push the button up and down as you do this. And if that didn't work, get a vacuum cleaner with a detachable hose like this and apply suction around the gap. This will hopefully suck the dirt and dust from around the button. Push the button up and down as you do this. This time, get some alcohol and dab a generous amount around the gap, just enough to seep into it. And of course, press the button up and down as you do this. Don't get caught up with the percentage of alcohol that you need. It'll all evaporate quickly, which is what we need to happen. The amount that got inside will take longer to dry than on the outside, so give it maybe at least an hour before you test to see if it worked. We've attempted all we could from the outside, so now we're going to go a little bit inside to get better access to the button and do some cleaning from there. First, we need to remove these coverings. There's one on each handle. They're like band-aids held on by cement, and you have to rip them off with a lot of force. If you see some crud in the gap around these covers, scrape it out the best you can. If you leave it in there, it'll just be harder to pull off. There are 3 approaches to pulling them off. If you're super strong, you can grab the top and just rip it off like this. Some models of controllers are tighter than others. Another way is to stick a tool in there, like a screwdriver, and press that trigger button down and just yank outward with the tool. What you don't want to do is press up against that trigger button as you do this, because it can scratch easily, or you could potentially break it off. Another way is to slowly pry it off using tools, and once you get that gap big enough, you should be able to rip it off. With those off, remove all these screws. One is under the battery cover. You need a size 8 Torx security bit. And what I mean by security bit is that it has a dimple in the middle of the bit. I don't think you can turn the screw if you have a non-security bit, which would not have that dimple. If a screw doesn't want to turn, try dropping 1 drop of water on it and let it soak for a minute, and tap on it, and then dry off that water. It should have loosened up a little bit. Lay the controller face up and take the top cover off. You now have increased access to the Xbox button, and you can do all the cleaning methods I showed you so far, hopefully to greater effect. And also clean the gap that's in the cover if there's any dirt in it. If the previous method didn't work, it's time to take things apart much further and get all the way to the button, and from there we can remove it, inspect it, and examine the padding that's underneath it, and replace anything that's broken. And we can also give it a much deeper cleaning. Note that when you take it apart this time, there is some risk that you may unintentionally break a crucial part. So proceed at your own risk. Also note, the last chapter in this video will show you how to put everything back together again. And one last note, there are slight differences between the different models of controllers, so just be mindful of that. From this point forward, you will need a size 6 Torx security bit. Remove these 2 screws. Remove the bottom shell. Next, we need to remove this part that's above the button. On my model, it's held on by 2 tabs. By lightly prying on them, I can pop the component off. For some of you, a much longer piece may pop off instead. That's no big deal, just set it aside for now. Remove the thumbsticks. They come straight out, don't twist them. Flip everything over and disconnect these 2 little wires. They just snap loose. Some of you will only have 1 wire to snap loose. Remove these 2 screws. You now need to pull up on the board to disconnect it from the board behind it, and then turn it 90 degrees like this. Be mindful of the wires that are on the edge. We're going to leave them attached, but if it feels like there's not enough slack, you can untuck some of them from the other side of the controller. If this headphone jack comes loose, just set it aside for now. With the board turned, remove these 6 screws from the other board. We are now going to pull the second board completely out. Hold things like this, then pop out the top of the board, and then the bottom, and just pull it out. It's kind of tricky, but just keep turning it certain directions and it'll come out. Clean this contact point with alcohol. It was situated beneath the button. Remove this rubber padding and take the whole thing to a sink and rinse it, and then let it fully dry. I don't recommend using alcohol on it because it may damage the black contact material that's on it. Also inspect this padding for damage, specifically the part that was under the button right here. Look for a small tear and make sure it still has reflexivity. If it needs to be replaced, order a new one that looks exactly like it. Also, take the button itself out and clean it and inspect it. If it looks broken, replace it as well. Lastly, clean the hole that the button was situated in. That was the last method. I'll now show you how to put everything back together. Place the Xbox button back into place. Make sure you don't put it in upside down. Also make sure all the other buttons are back into their place. If they have been pushed up, they have to be pushed back down. Just spin them until they drop into place. Then put the rubber padding back on. Put this board back into place. Put the 6 screws back into it. If this headphone jack came off, put it back into position like this with the metal contacts facing up. Flip the board back into position, then snap it back onto the other board. Locate the ends of these wires and snap those back into place. This is harder than you might think because the connector is tiny and it has to be positioned just perfectly to snap back on. Make sure these wires are tucked back into their gaps. Also stuff any other wires back into their gaps if you chose to pull them out. Put these 2 screws back into place. Snap this piece back into place. If this whole piece came off, it still all snaps back into place. Place the bottom shell back on. This is tricky because there's battery terminals that need to go into these gaps right here in order for it to go on correctly. Put these 2 screws back in. Put the top shell back on. Change back to a size 8 Torx security bit and put these screws back on. Then put the covers back on the handles and you're ready to go. I hope you found this video useful. Have a great day, everybody.